Kenya or Africa can just be beyond corruption, poverty, diseases, and all that. There's more to it than just that.
Hi, Anwar. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Rosie, for having me on the podcast today.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very, very excited about learning about you and your story. We connected through Instagram. We have a mutual friend, Daniel, who was in Kenya before the pandemic 2 years ago. And yeah, we connected through Instagram algorithm suggestions, basically. And when I saw your profile, when I saw that you were from Nairobi in Kenya and you're a photographer, I was very intrigued, to be honest, to know more about you. Your photographs are amazing, just to start with that. You're an amazing, very talented photographer.
Thank you.
And when I was doing my research before the recording, I actually saw that some of your photographs were published in like The Guardian, in NPR and different websites. So you've been really doing very well with your photography, and yeah, they're being published everywhere. So congrats on that. That's amazing. Maybe to start, I've got to admit, I'm not very knowledgeable about Kenya, and especially about Nairobi, but about Kenya in general. So maybe we're going to start with that. If you can tell us, where did you grow up? How was life in Kenya when you were a kid, and also now for you?
Basically, I am from Nairobi, Kenya. I grew up in between Nairobi and Mombasa. So what we have in Kenya is that Kenya is one of the countries in Africa, and we have like regions or provinces or let's say states for to make it easier for the rest of the people to understand. So we have like different counties that can be thought to as states. So I grew up in between Nairobi and Mombasa. So Nairobi is the capital city of Kenya, and Mombasa is the next, if not the capital, the most popular city in Kenya.
Okay. So
growing up, first of all, my parents used to live in Mombasa before we moved to Nairobi. But unfortunately, their relationship didn't last that long, so my parents split up, and I was left with my dad. So I was staying with my dad the entire time until I realized that, or I felt like staying with my dad wasn't a good thing. My dad was pretty something. He's not much of a talker, and I could even tell the number of words that he could say to me in a day. So
wow.
As a little kid, growing up with my dad and seeing how maybe quiet he is, it was quite not easy for me, because maybe I needed to talk, but I was afraid. So then I wanted to go live with my grandmother, which is in another province or in another state or a region, which is Kakamega. So I stayed with my grandmother for some time, because when my mother and my father were splitting up, my mother went with my two sisters. I have two siblings, two elder sisters. So my mother went with my two elder siblings and left with my dad. So I stayed with my dad until I felt like maybe I needed to change my environment. So I went to stay with my grandmother in another province. So we stayed there until some time, and then my mother now wanted me to start living with her. But unfortunately, I had lived for such a long time without my parents, meaning my dad or my mom. So I was just used to my grandmother. So every time my mother used to come and talk to my parents about me, or talk to my grandparents about me, I'd always refuse, because then it had been a very long time without my mom, and she was almost a stranger to me at that point. But there's this one time when I just decided like I needed to explore Nairobi. I wanted to know what Nairobi is like. So that is when I decided to go with my mother. By that time, my mom was staying in Nairobi. So that is when I came to Nairobi, and I have stayed in Nairobi since that time. And I have been in between Nairobi and Mombasa, back and forth, because yes, my parents are not together, but growing up, I had the privilege or I had the freedom of going wherever it is that I feel comfortable staying. But
Yeah.
most of my time I spent it with my mother.
Okay.
And what I'm very curious to know about is how did you discover and fell in love with photography and manage to become, professional photographer?
Oh, great. It's got a story. So when I was in high school, I was, we call it secondary school here. So when I was in secondary school, I was the head of the journalism club. So I was in charge of all the journalism activities that are involved in the school. So everything, I used to preside everything. But unfortunately, 2 years before I completed my secondary education, I lost the school camera. So after losing my school camera, the school was on my neck. I never told my mom that I lost the school camera. And I couldn't tell my mom because my mom she would really get mad. Cameras are expensive, and on top of the school fees, paying for another camera, buying another camera, that was just too much. So I survived in school through just my own means, because I was the head of journalism, so journalism club, so it was easy for me to access cameras when we were interacting with other schools, and I could do these other things. But when I was completing my secondary education, now the school was on my neck. They decided that I am going to have to pay for that camera before they can clear me. So I had to pay that camera, and it was quite a pinch after all the things that I had achieved as a journalism club leader. So I decided from that point that cameras are not expensive, but I have really gone through a great deal of having to lie to my mom and having to lie to the school about the camera. So once I am done paying the school camera, I am also going to buy my own camera and just take it from there.
Yeah. Cameras are expensive, like good cameras are expensive, but I can imagine, the level of life in Kenya and the income that you make compared with the price of professional camera must make a camera a very, very expensive item, no?
Very true. So I started out with a point and shoot. Rosie, you might know what a point and shoot is.
Yeah.
So
I think everyone starts there.
Yeah, so I started out with a point and shoot camera, and it was a second-hand camera. But the funny thing is, I bought it at, I think it was $30. $30. I bought my first camera at $30 because now there was somebody who was selling a camera just because they wanted the money they were into a lot of things and they just wanted fast moving money. So that's the money I had. So at that point, that is where I started. And then later on, when I was beginning out, I thought that photography is all about, the best way to make money out of photography was to work with models. So I was very much into modeling. I used to look at a lot of modeling, what is going on in the modeling industry, and I used to shoot a lot of models. But later on, I discovered that, and these models weren't paying enough. Like, it's very difficult to work with individual models if it's not an agency or something like that. So it was very, very...
Yeah, because they always want free photo shoots, don't they?
Exactly. Too much work involved and just too little money coming in. So after working with models for some time, I realized that is not really what I wanted, because I felt like I was doing so much, yet I am so frustrated. I don't like what I'm doing anymore. So that is when I joined up with... I didn't even know editing by then. I used to edit on my phone, shooting on a point and shoot camera, but I edit on my phone. And it worked out quite well. They used to love it. So I could just make enough money to survive. And then there's this one time, just out of the love of modeling, I got into, because I had learned a great deal about modeling, I got into a competition about modeling in an organization in Kibera. They were offering quite a good amount of money to the winners. and then they'll give you a job. If you win the competition, you get a job, and then quite a good amount of money at the end of it. And so yes, I got in as a model, but my initial idea was to make enough money so that I can buy my own camera. So things went well, and I won. I did the training for some time. I won the modeling competition. Yet I did.
That's cool. So you can be the model in front of the camera, and you can be the photographer behind the camera. That's practical.
Back then. That was in 2017, 2018. Back then I could do that. But ideally, I never wanted to be a model. I just wanted the money. So after winning the competition, I got the job with this organization. It's a community-based organization. They gave me a job, and I also got the money. So from that point, I started saving. I could save from the money I made from working with them and the money I made from a little bit of photos I took, or still shooting models, because now I was very known for, I was popular because I am a model, but I was also popular because I could take photos. So it was easy for me to save a little bit of here and there from my job and from shooting a little bit of this and that. And I bought my first, not really a professional camera, but it was a Canon, still beginner stage, but it was good enough. It was a DSLR. So yeah, that is where I started.
You mentioned Kibera, which is where you live and where you do a lot of your photography now.
Yes.
And we saw online that's the largest urban slum in Africa. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about what that means, what people, what their lives are like, just sort of some information about that area?
Oh, great. So Kibera is actually the largest urban slum in Africa. There's a lot of misconceptions about Kibera. Starting out photography, that was one of the things that I realized about Kibera. When you go online and Google Kibera, there's just a lot of information that comes up that does not truly reflect the people of Kibera or the life of Kibera.
Yeah.
So when I started working with this organization, that is when I discovered myself. I realized that in the beginning, I used to hate Kibera because it was actually the largest. I used to think it's filthy myself. Back then, I used to think it's filthy. I used to hate it. I couldn't wait to move out. But after I grew a little bit older, I realized that there's actually a lot of misperceptions about Kibera. And there's nobody else who's going to come from anywhere to tell the world about what really Kibera is and what life in Kibera really is. Of course, life is very difficult in Kibera. People are not, people are not very well off here, but people are very, very happy. We have very happy people, very accommodating people, and very hardworking people, people who are always looking forward to make something for themselves each and every day. So once I realized that, I took it upon myself to document, to tell the positive stories of Kibera, to tell stories about Kibera in a positive way, a way that is going to inspire somebody else who does not live in Kibera, not only to look at it as a slum, but a place whereby life can be beautiful and beautiful people exist there, and there's just so much good in the area that it is not talked about unless I talk about it.
I think oftentimes with lower income areas, that's where people are creative and resourceful, and there's a lot of community together, and you kind of see a different side of humanity oftentimes in lower income areas because they kind of group together, and there's a real kind of, there's a different...
Yeah, they help each other out and stick together and help each other.
That is actually true, because when you actually are inside Kibera, you'll notice that there are a lot of community organizations that are focusing on trying to uplift the living standards of people. And there are a lot of youth groups that are organized into just organizing youth into groups so that they can be able to avoid drugs or idling in the idling around and doing nothing. And you see, now the problem is with idling is that you start thinking about drugs and crime. But when we have things like community organizations, and we have youth groups, and we have community events where people can just come together and do something, not even if they're not being paid, but it's something that is communal. Now, people start thinking of the next person as my brother, my sister, somebody who needs help. So, in as much as people do not have a lot, but these people are always willing to help in whichever smallest way they can.
I mean, I'm going to speak about myself, not to make a generalization, but I know very little about Kenya and Africa. And for example, I know that I tend to make the huge mistake, and I do know it's a mistake, to class Africa as all the same, when there are 40, 50 countries in Africa, and life in one country can be extremely different than another one. And also in Europe or in the United States, when we hear about Africa or Kenya, it's often about negative things. It's about poverty, it's about people starving, it's about disease. You don't hear very often people doing amazing things, African people doing amazing things in Africa, and trying to help the community, or being an artist like you are and stuff like that. We don't hear those stories very often. We usually hear the negative more than the daily life of normal people like you that, went to school and getting a job and just living life like we all are. We don't hear about that very often, I feel, in the news or in the papers or stuff like that. And this is why it's great to talk to you, to have, a sense of the reality, in a sense.
Yeah, it is very true. You are right. Like, I think that is most often the wrong perception, especially when it comes to Africa or countries in Africa. Because I think stories that are always that get the most popularity or most airplay are always negative stories about Africa, because I really don't know why Africa has always been perceived like that. But there's a lot of other great stories. But also point out that it is true that there's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of corruption when it comes to the government, there's a lot of which is always highlighted, but not what people are doing to actually try and make up for this perception. There's a lot of things that are being done to try and fight corruption. Okay, corruption in Kenya, corruption is quite rampant. It is a very, very big problem, and this thing stems all the way from the government officials. But again, still, you get people who are really, really trying to make something good, something clean, something that is out of their sweat without corruption or corrupt hands, which are stories that are never really highlighted. So, like you said, we never get to hear about these stories, and that is why maybe people like me and other fellow photographers here in Kenya and maybe in Kibera are trying to communicate. Like, there's something good. Kenya or Africa can just be beyond corruption, poverty, diseases, and all that. There's more to it than just that.
Yeah, and I mean, there is corruption anywhere anyway, even in the big richest countries. This is not an African issue or a Kenyan issue at all, so it's just, we talk about it more, but
it is just
it's everywhere. Yeah.
I think what I love about your photography, I'm just looking at it on my Instagram, on my Instagram on my phone right now, and I really feel like I get a glimpse into Kenya, and it's not, you said you started off with models, and that's very glitzy and glam and, smiling at the camera and posing and angles and all the rest of it. But I love that these are real photographs and people aren't necessarily smiling. They're not necessarily looking at the camera. They're not you know, it's just people doing their things. Like I love the ones from the animal market, for example. Like I've never seen photographs from an animal market, and it's just so interesting. I don't really know what a question is. I'm just like, I wish I had a question to ask you here. Do you have a question? I just love how raw and real it is, and it's not posed, it's not fake, it's not trying to be something that it's not. Is that really important to you to try and show the real, like the realness of Kenya?
Oh yes. So when I started working with this organization, is when I realized that I have always been a photographer, but I have been, you know, when you're starting out as a photographer, you want to do everything before you discover yourself. That is why that is why I almost hated photographer, and I almost abandoned photographer because I didn't know my lane. But once I started working with these people, this community organization works with them, empowering the girl child, providing clean water, sanitation in the community, providing education. So when I started working with this organization, I started visiting people, homes, like home-to-home visits, and you could get to hear about people's stories. You could see poverty. Yes, people are suffering, but to some level, I used to visit people and I could see poverty in a way that I have never seen it myself. And that wasn't very good. Like, I just felt like there's always something that I can do or something that I can tell that is just beyond that level. So I realized, having worked with them for some time, I realized that my calling or my interest in photography is actually working with people hand in hand, being able to tell the stories that are often underreported or often overlooked, stories that people maybe never pay attention to. That is why you see pictures like people in the market. You probably see a wedding, just something. Everything is all about the everyday life of the people of Kibera, or everyday life of the people of Kenya. And these are people, things that are often overlooked. So, yeah, it is very, very important to me to be able to tell a story that cannot be, somebody else cannot be able to tell on their own. So if I am privileged enough to be able to tell that story, it's an honor.
I think I read somewhere that you'd said, you know, the more that you see different people, the more that you know that everybody's just the same, and, you know, trying to connect people on the most basic levels.
Yeah, true. So in my, I have been working with a lot of people. I have realized that the world is just something simple and something small. We only see things with perceptions. But if you took your time and got to know somebody, you realize that we are all the same, all across the world. I could probably be going through something else and you're going through something different. But when you look at it, we are all connected. Like, your problem could be my problem, only that you are experiencing it in a different world and I'm experiencing it in a different world. So if we can be able to listen to each other, then maybe we can be able to help solve these problems, because I could be experiencing something that you experienced a year ago and you worked it out. So it's probably easier for you to help me to work it out. And maybe I could be going through something and I overcome it, and then I could be of help to you. So the world is just one simple thing and we are all connected. It's just a matter of listening. If you listen, you will hear. That's what I say. Okay, if you listen, you will see.
I like that.
Yeah, that is very true. We've talked about that before with Rosie, about when most of the time politician, media is always trying to divide us and us as human beings, always pointing at differences, why this person or this country or this company is better than this one, and why we should always, they always point at the differences, but they don't point to the fact that ultimately, like you said, we all go through life, we all have good days and bad days, wherever we come from, we have similar problem that every human being have, about relationship with people and stuff like that, for example. And ultimately, wherever we come from, we all work towards the same goals, which is being happy and living a life where we have people around us and we do something that we like, and that's it. Like, very often, like, we all want the same things, but yeah, most of the time we focus on the small differences and we try to divide each other when, yeah, we all want the same stuff, honestly.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is true. We all have so much in common, but we tend to focus on the little things that are not common. The little things that divide us is what we tend to amplify.
Yeah. Before I go back to your personal story, I've got one last question about your photography. What is your big vision, your big dream for your photography career? Something that you would like to achieve, and yeah, what is it?
I don't know if it's every photographer's dream to be able to travel around the world, but personally, I am into people. I am into the business of people and not into the business of photography. So
I like that.
So for me, if I am able to if I can travel around the world doing photography and telling people stories, if I can do that, if I could travel, that is what I would like to do, to be able to tell people stories across the world, not just in Africa, not just in Kenya or any country in Kenya. I mean, I believe we're all the same. We're all equal. So I'd love that. I'd love to take my photography to a level whereby I'm able to go to a specific area and be able to highlight a specific issue, and not just to highlight, to be able to be part of the solution if possible. Because most often that is where we forget as photographers or as storytellers. All we want is to highlight, but we are never part of the solution. But for me, as much as I want to highlight it, I want to highlight it and be a part of the solution. Like, what can we do as the human race, or as a nation, or as somebody who is in a position to help? What can I do? What can I offer? How can I be of help? That is what I'd love.
Yeah, talking about that, when I was doing my research, I've seen that you worked on very cool projects, including one about gender. I don't remember the exact name, but you photographed some people from Uganda and Kenya. I think that were from the LGBTQI community, and you're trying to raise awareness, right, about the topic.
Yeah. Oh, that is actually true. So, I really have neutral. I am neutral when it comes to the LGBT community. I don't give my own opinions, but again, it is very, very important to highlight these kind of things that are happening. So I photographed Ryan. When I met Ryan is a music recording artist. I met him in a studio. But when we first met, Ryan also thought that I was gay. So I was quite uneasy around Ryan. So when he noticed I'm quite uneasy, we got into a conversation whereby Ryan could tell me about his life story. So Ryan is a young man from Uganda who is a refugee in Kenya. He's living in Kenya, escaping persecution in Uganda, because in Uganda, gay people are punishable. Gayism is punishable by life imprisonment or death. So prior to my meeting with Ryan had witnessed one of his friends being beaten almost to death by members of his community who actually found out about his sexuality. So Ryan decided to seek refuge in Kenya. So when I met him, he was at a refuge center, one of the refuge centers in Kenya. And that is where he was recording his music. And he's just a normal person who's trying to get by, but who is afraid of talking about or letting his sexuality out there. He's not free.
Yeah.
He's not a free man. Yes, he is free, but he's not, he doesn't feel like a free man. Yeah, and
I understand when you've been prosecuted like that. I mean, he's just scared, I guess. Just understandable.
I am actually on the same note. I am actually applying for a grant to be able to go to follow up and highlight the same story about the LGBT refugees in Kenya. So if it goes through, I might probably be having I might be able to tell so many stories about the life
Yeah.
of the people who, the LGBT community that are probably going through a hard time, or not necessarily a hard time. Some of them are having it good, but it is very, very important to tell both the negative and the positive stories so that we can learn where you're coming from and where we are going or where we could possibly go, if we just learn to look at each other as normal human beings.
Yeah. I would like to go back to more like your personal story and your personal life, because we were talking about misconception before, and I have a ton of misconception about life in Kenya. Always have this image of, I don't know, not going to school, having internet, having a smartphone, stuff like that. I think my vision of life over there is just totally wrong, honestly. And because I haven't done my research, to be honest. But could you tell us maybe just, how was your childhood in terms of, going to school, being with friends, life as a teenager, things that you did, just life.
Great. So, I mentioned earlier that I grew up in between Nairobi and Mombasa. So my life as a kid was mostly, so I spent, I wasn't very good at school in the beginning, in the very early classes of school, because of what had happened to my family. So I wasn't very good. I wasn't very fast in class. So I did a little bit of good amount of homeschooling because I wasn't very fit to sit in class with other. I remember this one time my mom took me to a school, a very good school. It's called Nairobi Muslim Academy, but I couldn't perform. So there's no way I could join the school. So I had to do some good amount of homeschooling before I could actually join an actual school. And those were very the earlier classes of my primary school. But later on, when I got to around grade 6, 7, 8 here, I was actually doing very, very well. I was always one of the best students in class. So that is one of the most important things I always remember about my childhood and education. I remember that I wasn't very good, but because I think of myself as a very hardworking person, because from being not as a good student in class all the way to being one of the best students in grade 6, 7, and 8, that was really good. That was that kept me going. It told me that I can actually rise from anything if only I push myself hard enough. So that was part of my primary education. So after I completed my primary education, I went to a boarding school. Mind you that I had not lived. I always found my parents very, very harsh, both my mom and my dad. So it was always very, very difficult for me to talk. As a child, I was always very, very quiet, very, very introverted, because most of the time I felt terrified. I felt terrified of both my mom or my dad. So spent a lot of my time. So when I went to boarding school, it was more like, for me, it was more like a relief, because even when I'm at home, I never talk to my mom. So being able to go to a boarding school, that was just being sent on an island that I've been dreaming of.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I wasn't very bad. I got into a lot of things. I had discovered that I can actually do very, very well if I put my mind to something. So I went. We have like Form 1, Form 2, Form 3, and Form 4. In the very first Form 1 and Form 2, I joined basketball. I played basketball for a while, and then I realized, in as much as I can work hard, I can be good at anything. I just didn't have the talent in basketball. So I dropped basketball and joined rugby. So yeah, I did play rugby. I played rugby for the school. I was on the school team. I wasn't the school I wasn't the team captain, but I was the school captain, like the school president. By the time I was in,
that's cool.
Wow.
Yeah, so I worked myself to being the school president as well as being the head of the journalism club. So that gave me leverage when it comes to accessing the school resources. I could almost access anything that I needed in the school because now I am privileged, of course. So that gave me an easy time throughout my high school education. And that is how I found myself into a position of being able to access a world that would probably be difficult for somebody else who was in my position, coming all the way from Kibera. So it was easy for me to access some other things because now when you are dealing with the administration and you are good at what you do, you are honest and you are hardworking, it becomes easy for you to talk with other people to receive you to access things, to access information, to get information. So that is how I came up into being who I am.
Is education free in Kenya?
That is a misperception, but they say it is free, but it is not free. It is very, very expensive. But that is what the politicians are always telling us about. Every time we are going to an election, they tell us we are going to give you free education, but it's not true. It's a big lie. Okay, so it's kind of subsidized, but the level of subsidy is not. They subsidize it so that they can call it free, but in as much as they are trying to subsidize it, it is not very, very free for somebody who's not very well off. There's a lot of struggle that goes into that parents do to be able to pay education. The primary education is a little bit easier, but when we come to the high school education or the secondary education, that is where most of the kids probably drop out of school. Most of the people drop out of school when they are going to high school because the high school education is actually very, very expensive. Unless you perform very, very well, you get sponsored. But if you're just an average student and you're not very well off, you might need to be lucky.
Okay.
Yeah, so it must have been very hard for you. And I understand what you mean by you are a hard worker because obviously with everything going on with your family and not living with your parents and everything, it must have been really hard for you a lot of determination and a lot of self, a lot of courage and everything to push yourself to keep going without having the support and the resources of your family that maybe other kids have.
Yeah, it was very, very hard. It was actually very, very hard. But as for me, I used to look at it as I don't know. Well, maybe I just grew up a long time ago and I didn't know about it. But I used to look at my family issues or my parents' issues as their own issues. So when we took a break when I was in primary, if we have a break and then I'll go to Mombasa because my dad now is in Mombasa and my mom is in Nairobi. So when we are on a break, I'll take the break and go to Mombasa, stay with my dad for some time, and then come back to my mom. And that's how I used to do it. So I could do it each time I got the opportunity. I go stay with my dad for a couple of days and then I come back. So I did it back and forth until when I completed my high school my primary education. My mom sent me to my dad and she told me to go to my dad and ask my dad what is going to happen to me now that I'm done with my primary education. Oh, my dad is quite something. My dad sent me back to my mother and told me, okay, go back to your mother and tell her I don't know what is going to happen to you unless if you want to start doing a little bit of hand jobs here and there that could earn you money. And my mom wasn't for the idea. My mom wasn't for the idea for me to start doing a little hand jobs that could earn me money. So I went back to my mom, and my mom decided that she's going to put me back to high school education. So that is when I went to high school education. Still, after high school education, I still went to my dad. Stayed with my dad for some time, and still my dad was the same guy. Like, what are you going to do now that you are done with education? For him, once you're done with, not even for him, not just for him, for most parents here in Kenya or in Kibera, once you're done with your secondary education or high school education, you are old enough to take care of yourself. So university doesn't really matter. You just, now you need to start fending for yourself.
Yeah.
So when I went back to my dad after doing my high school education, he immediately threw me into some this and that. And I caught up with what he wanted me to do, so I could do this and that, whatever he used to do, I could do it. I could find other jobs for myself, and I could do it, and I could make some little cash for myself on the side. And that was even before I bought a camera. So I could make a little bit of this. I taught myself how to skate after my high school education. When I was staying with my dad, during that period, I taught myself how to skate. And I bought a few pairs of skate shoes, roller skates. And I started teaching kids how to skate around the place where I used to stay. And honestly, I could say that I used to make some really good money from doing that. So that is one of the things that I did to make money after high school and while staying at my dad. So when my dad realized that I could make my own money, the situation became even worse. Now we barely talked, but we used to meet for dinner. We used to take supper together. So every time we are taking supper, he'll just point out a few things when we are taking supper, and then he's done. That is it. But I appreciate him. He taught me how to be a man.
I'm curious to know your relationship and the differences between you and your sister, and the difference between, how man and woman are, or like during the childhood, how is it going, and education? Is it the same level of education and everything for man and woman, or you got different things?
Oh, so I have two elder sisters, like I mentioned. I am the only boy, the only son, and the last born. So you can imagine in Africa, when you're a man, so much, a lot depends on you. So for me, I have been privileged enough because my sisters love me too much. They went to school. They performed very well, all thanks to my mom. She did all the job. And about the education system, it is the same. Whether you're a man or you're a woman, the amount of fees that a man is paying, or a boy or any child is paying, it is going to be the same regardless whether you are female or male when it comes to school. So unless it is different schools, but it is pretty much the same. It is always standard. The education is always standard. So so my sisters, my elder sister is not married, but the second born is married. So she also stays in Mombasa again.
Yeah. And in Europe or in the US, I mean, in a lot of countries, being a photographer is not considered as a real job, because it's very hard to make money as a full-time photographer. It's not very easy because, it's not a real office job like a lot of people think about. How is it that in Kenya, when you told your parents or people, I want to become a photographer, did you have a lot of, that's strange, you should be going to a normal job, or how was that welcome?
Now that's funny because it is not just in Europe or where photography is not considered a job. Like even here, photography is not considered a real job. Like most people are still waiting for you to get a real job, because when you're doing photography, that is not an actual job. Well, photography is hard, very, very hard, so very, very hard, especially when you're trying to, for people like us who are trying to do documentary photography and photojournalism. It is very, very hard, because then you need to pay the bills, and it is not very, very consistent. So,
yeah,
I don't think I ever told any of my parents that I wanted to be a photographer, or I'm a photographer. And till today, my mom knows that I'm doing photography, but she has no idea what photography really entails, or what kind of photography I do, or all she knows is that I am a photographer and I take photos. About my dad, he just sees me with a camera, and he has never asked. So for me, I am just trying to make it in a world that I have been introduced to on social media, and a world that I have loved ever since I was a kid, and something that I just want to make it. So they have no idea about photography, or what kind of photography I'm doing, but they appreciate the fact that they think I have a job and I can survive on my own. So yeah. They are comfortable with that.
Yeah, that's the most important.
Yes.
Where do you find the courage and the motivation and the strength to pursuing this passion when, there are probably easier way you could make money, other things you could do, other work that you could do to make money and to make a living? What motivates you every day to carry on and pursue this passion?
What motivates me is my background, where I came from. I come from a poor background, and I know what it means to come from a poor background. I want to be an example to the rest of the kids that are coming after me, and even other people that are out here. I am not successful, but you can actually do something genuine, something that does not need you to take a shortcut, something that the world could reward you, God could reward you. And that is where I draw my strength. I draw my strength from my previous encounters, the people I have encountered, the life I have lived before, and the everyday life I see other people living around here is my encouragement, is what keeps me going. Like, things can get better. It is not always bad. You can be a good person and you can make it. You just have to work hard, believe in what you're doing, and go at it. Just keep going, no matter how many setbacks you get. If you believe in what you're doing, you'll get there. Just keep going. Just don't look back. Don't listen to other people that are trying to discourage you, because the world has a lot of that. The world has a lot of discouragement. The world has a lot of sad stories, and you cannot focus on sad stories. You cannot move forward. You cannot move forward if you're looking at the back. So just choose your lane and decide your path and stick at it. Keep going. That is where I draw my strength.
I love that. Thank you for that.
There's nothing I can say after that. It's just, yeah, it's so true. It's, amazing answer. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Anwar, for taking the time to talk to us. It's been so nice to hear about your photography journey, about life in Kenya, about your background, about everything. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast today. I really hope you guys can visit Kenya. Really, you guys should visit.
Yeah, we'd love to.
Yeah, we would love to. We talked to Daniel actually about that, and whenever the world and traveling is okay again, collaborating with I Like Local and maybe doing experiences and stuff, we would love to.
Yes. I did listen to your podcast with Daniel, by the way. That was like, Daniel. He's an inspiration, to be honest. Daniel is an inspiration, and I actually realized he's an inspiration after listening to your podcast, because I didn't know as much as I learned about him before I listened to the podcast. But after I listened to the podcast, I realized, whoa, this guy, this guy is just something.
Yeah,
He is. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, like you said before, like this is like you use your photography to inspire other people, and we use our mic and the podcast to hopefully inspire other people. This is why we do it. So I'm very happy that you enjoyed it.
Please do. I think I'm going to listen to each and every podcast that is there, because there's so much inspiration that I could get, and it is just so difficult to find something good. But once you've discovered where you can get something good, I stick there. So I'm going to stick around.
Thank you. Yeah. We got one last question. It's a question we ask every guest at the end of the episode. It's, if you could have a conversation with anyone in the world, dead or alive, that you think is the most interesting person you could ever met, who would you talk to and why?
Whoa. Dead or alive. I don't know. Okay. I think I'll probably choose someone who is dead, someone I've never met. I have never met my grandfather from my mother's side, and from what I hear, he was quite a big fan of me when I was a kid, when I was a little boy. And I don't know why, but I have always felt so connected to him, even if I've never saw him. He just saw me when I was a little kid, and I have never seen him. But still, I have always felt so connected to him. Like, there's just so much of maybe what I could have been, and he knew what I could have been, and he probably always used to say that. And it always feels like, oh, man, I am not great, I am not doing anything, but I can do it, and you should just see me. I am trying. Yeah, so I think I'll probably choose to have a conversation with my grandfather, and maybe get an insight of the kind of man he was, and for him to see the kind of a man I am right now, if I probably live up to the level of a standard of a man he probably thought I would be, or not.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure he'd be very proud.
I hope so.
Thank you so much, Anwar, for this conversation. I've really enjoyed learning more about you personally and about your country, and I find it very inspiring, your strength, your motivation to keep going. And even if, the path is hard, things are complicated, but you have an idea, you have a vision, and you're doing everything you can to achieve, your dreams and whatever you want to pursue. And this is, I think, an amazing lesson. And thank you for your openness to just share everything with us. Thank you.
You're most welcome. I look forward to a lot of this kind of inspiration too. I do appreciate, honestly, I do appreciate being here. And this is quite an honor.
I will link your Instagram profile in the description, and your website as well, so people can see your work and people can contact you, and everyone can reach out and see your amazing photographs.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anwar, and thank you to everybody listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll be back next Wednesday with a brand new episode. Bye.
Bye.